So many patients are interested in clinical trials, but don't necessarily understand how the enrollment process works. So can you kind of walk me through what a patient should expect if they've been offered the opportunity to take part in a clinical trial?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. And for most patients, it might be such a longer, almost overwhelming conversation to have a sense of participating in a clinical trial and what sort of that all that entails. So, when I speak with patients, the first thing I think you have to really do is lay out what are all the treatment options, right? In terms of what would be the standard options, why would we be considering a clinical trial? What is that really, what is the sort of the intent of the clinical trial? If a patient then goes through that informed consent almost discussion where we talk about risks, we talk about benefits, we talk about logistics, I think one of the things we always kind of think through is that there is sometimes even more participation onus, right, on the patient in terms of testing, in terms of traveling, and things like that too. But once we get to a point where he says, yes, we want to sort of participate in this, then it really kicks off this almost timeline, right? For many trials, we go through the screening period, right, where they have to undergo potentially all these tests really done for safety and make sure that they meet the eligibility criteria for them to participate. And that process can even sometimes require them repeating some of these evaluations or things like that too. But really from that informed, from signing that informed consent, that the nice thing is that it does kick off this like really operational timeline so that things have to be done, right, in a shorter, hopefully, period of time, and then have to be evaluated so that they can enroll onto the trial itself.
Great. If a patient still has standard treatment options available, if they haven't exhausted all of the standards of care, why should they also consider a clinical trial?
That's it sort of, I think, is a little bit dependent on what
Right.
stage they are in terms of their cancer journey, but clinical trials are great opportunities, I tell patients. I think that it not only gives them the opportunity to potentially participate in something and receive medication that we really do feel can hopefully beat what we have in terms of standard therapies. It gives sometimes patients new mechanisms of action, new ways to treat the cancer, where potentially some of the standard agents might be using some of the similar mechanisms as before. Some clinical trials, again, approach the cancer in such a different direction that it really kind of gives an opportunity in an earlier time point for them to participate. Some clinical trials are actually sort of building on standard of care where they receive sort of standard agents and other things in addition to that standard of care. So I think it all kind of depends on the trial that's really being discussed with the patient itself. But the other thing that I really talk to patients about is participating in a clinical trial also has a lot of rules associated with it, right? I think there's sometimes anxiety of taking something experimental, right? And obviously there's rules in place in terms of safety, in terms of how we monitor
Right.
patients. And in that context, they may be getting even more tests that are trying to identify these side effects or things like that we're trying to understand. But at the same time, that level of just consistency in terms of safety monitoring, imaging monitoring, making sure that we're looking at things and making sure that a patient is truly benefiting for them to continue on the treatment.
Right.
I think that kind of lens that we put the patient under, so to speak, in a little bit more magnified way, sometimes actually also values the patient, even if they're getting something that is similar to standard of care also.
Thank you. Now, finally, what makes KCRS such a valuable meeting?
There's so many things to sort of take away from a meeting like this. I mean,
Right.
it is truly becoming such a different style meeting where there's so much cutting edge science, there's so much cutting edge clinical in terms of even sometimes clinical trials and the results of
Right.
those clinical trials. You can imagine that there's also really a bridge between understanding even some of these earlier trials and also that scientific data. It really is taking away to understand really the mechanics of how we should be thinking about treating patients and hopefully achieving cure.